How can I make myself more competitive?
How do I build my network?
I want my career to go to the next level, but I don't really know where to start.
I hate the job I am in. What else can I do?
I want to work in healthcare, but I don't want to be a doctor.
I need connections in a new industry. Where should I start?
Whether you're a college student trying to decide on a career path, a young professional trying to develop their career, or maybe you're in the mid to late stages of your own professional journey and you're looking for a new challenge, or maybe you're facing an unexpected job search. Whoever you are, wherever you are, welcome to the Professionists podcast. And together, let's find your fit. Welcome to another episode of the Professionists podcast, where we explore career paths, professional development, and look at the careers of experienced and seasoned professionals. Like, share, and subscribe so that you never miss a new episode, and let's together find your fit. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring the world of resumes with someone who has themselves undergone their own career change, moving from the world of sales to that of career development, resume, and LinkedIn profile writing. After moving from sales, he went on to become the CEO and founder of Career Pulse. Hailing from Massachusetts, we are pleased to welcome Earl Dauley. If you'd like to find out more about Career Pulse and the services they offer, or perhaps you'd like to connect with Earl himself, you can do that by heading on over to www.careerpulse.co, or you can also connect with Earl directly on LinkedIn. Earl, thanks for joining us.
Ben, thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
Well, you've got an interesting story. You started out in sales coming out of college.
Yeah, actually, before I finished college, I had been working in a restaurant. I ended up taking an extra semester to finish up with school. I was a few credits short for graduation day, and I moved back home and needed to make ends meet. So I was working in a restaurant, and I had a buddy come, and he was sitting at the bar, and he said, "Hey, I'm making all this money selling cell phones in a Verizon store." So I said, "Okay, cool. That sounds great. Why don't I try that out?" And I knew I had a few credits left in school, and it happened to work out that they were pretty flexible with scheduling. So I ended up working and doing that. That was my first kind of tiptoe into sales. And for the next 5 or 6 years, I bounced around. I had a bunch of different roles, mostly in tech sales and a few gigs in recruiting, working for recruiting agencies. And that's kind of how I got my start. And that led me up until not quite a year ago. So that was a big change for me at that point. But yeah, my foundation is in sales, and that's kind of where, definitely the strongest skill set that I have professionally to this day.
Some of our listeners are college students, and I think there's this unspoken expectation that everyone gets through in 4 years. And, ideally, it's ideal to get through something, whatever it is, according to a time frame. But as you've shown in your own experience, taking an extra semester is by no means the end of the world.
No, and you're right. There's an unwritten expectation that you go and do it in 4 years, and then some people, you go back for another 2 years to get a master's degree or whatever it might be. But I think there's a lot of pressure on college students to get it done and have this certain linear path. And for a lot of us, that's not practical. For me, it was a couple of things. I was immature and I had some discipline issues, so that cost me a little bit of time. And I also ran out of money for another semester when I was at school. So I had to go back and work and make some money and kind of reset myself. And I finished at my own pace, and I'm glad that everything worked out the way that it did. But I think there's a message in there for sure for current college students to be gentle with yourself, do your best, certainly. But if you are falling behind somebody else, just know that they're on their own path and you're on yours.
Yeah, I mean, the only person who's imposing that time frame on you is really you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think people can put a lot of pressure on themselves, especially when you're young and you're just figuring out. I mean, I had no idea what I wanted to do with myself when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. I feel like society puts a lot of pressure on these kids and young adults to figure out what they want to do with the rest of their lives. And sometimes it's just not that simple.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your sales career. What did you enjoy about sales?
For me, I really liked interacting with people and solving problems for people. I've sold different things, and you can speculate on how much of a real impact I was having while I was working, selling those things. But it was always the people for me, and hearing success stories of how, yes, we need this. You can provide this for us at a reasonable cost. That was always really fulfilling to me. there's a lot of salespeople who are just like, go, 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 1000%. I'm going to crush my quota every quarter. And I wasn't necessarily that guy. I was good in that respect, but what I really enjoyed more was people. And I think that is what ultimately led me away from that path and into what I ended up doing since then.
What was the difference between someone who was a good salesperson and someone who maybe was fairly mediocre?
I think that could be different. That answer could be different depending on what they're selling. I think a lot of it is charisma. A lot of it is persistence. There's an element of trust that's required in selling anything. People tend to work with people they trust and people they like. In that way, I think a lot of successful salespeople need to be chameleons in their personality. You need to be able to mesh with different types of people, particularly if you're working in person, but also if you're, making sales calls over the phone or even sending emails. I think that it's really important to be able to mesh and get along with different types of personalities, because one sales tactic, what works to sell something to me might not necessarily work to sell something to you. And I think a lot of really highly effective salespeople can identify the personality type of who they're talking to and make adjustments on the fly.
You spoke about charisma, and I feel like there's this idea that you either have it or you don't. But do you think you can learn some of those skills and kind of learn to have some charisma in a role like sales?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sales mirrors sports in a lot of ways. And I played football when I was in high school, and my coaches used to say, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So in other words, you'll have some people who are naturally talented salespeople. I've worked with some really, really good ones who are like the Jordan Belfort from Wolf of Wall Street. They will sell you this pen. That's right. And they'll do it. And even if you're a salesperson and you know what their game is, they'll sell you a pen somehow. But there are other people who can be really good. And I think it takes consciously studying and applying sales techniques and getting advice from wherever you can get it in order to be able to hone that skill. And that was me. I wasn't a natural. I was pretty good at talking to people. Getting the sales techniques down took a lot of really conscious effort and watching other people do it and repetition before I could really do it well.
What did you find was the thing that finally made you decide to leave sales and head in a different direction?
It was so mentally for me, it was a gradual change. For me, I left college and I had a bunch of student loan debt. So moving into sales was an obvious decision because I needed to pay my loans, needed to pay the bills. So sales was the most obvious way for me to do that. As time went on, and especially after I worked for my first recruiting agency, I got the idea that I was pretty good at writing and at just general command of the English language. So I started writing more and more resumes. And that was something that I started doing at first, nights and weekends, helping out friends and family, stuff like that. Yeah. And over time, I did it in conjunction with the other jobs that I was working, sales jobs. And it just became a little bit less sales, a little bit more resumes as time went on. And back in April of last year, I wasn't able to keep up with what I was expected to be doing in sales. COVID hit and times were difficult. It was just, I had been doing a lot of stuff in person and I couldn't do that anymore. And I lost my sales job. And that same afternoon, I said, okay, now's the time. Let's start the resume business. I went and became professionally certified. And that's kind of spiraled into what it's now become today.
Fantastic. So help me understand, why should someone consider getting a resume writer?
Oh, well, I've got, there's a line on my website that is something to the effect of anyone can write a resume in the same way that anyone can bake. But the last time we tried to bake a souffle, it wasn't pretty. You can write your own resume. And I look back, it's funny. Every once in a while, I'll stumble across an old resume that I wrote for myself from 2012 or whatever it was, when I had no idea that there were actual techniques to this. And now I see that. And if someone applied to work for me with that resume, I would throw it out. But there's a lot of technique to it. So
you were talking about the souffle example and
So having someone write your resume opens you up to a different perspective on your own background. You may know really well what you do day in and day out. Most people can't put that into words as a highly effective resume, we'll probably get into this more, but there are a few different characteristics you want to see in a really good resume. One of them is that it's written that you are an achiever and not a doer. So I can tell you what I have done Monday to Friday for the last however many years you've been working, but it takes someone else asking you some questions and uncovering maybe some stories or some value adds that you didn't have in your own writing to really bring that to the forefront and make an effective resume. So to me, working with a resume service gives somebody who's experienced an opportunity to ask you what you've done, what effect it had, and why would someone want to hire you?
Yeah. So this is probably a good point for us to turn towards the resume issue. You mentioned that a good resume talks about achievements rather than things that you've done. But what are the core parts of what you would call a good resume?
Yeah, that's a wide open question. It's different for every individual person, every type of background. Even if I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, for example, and I'll see people who have the exact same title who have totally different backgrounds. So each individual case is its own case, but there are some commonalities, right? So, for example, in the past year especially, there's been a huge trend toward digital hiring where, and this has been going on for years, but it's just been really accelerated since 2020. Applicant tracking systems are the biggest potential spoiler and also the biggest potential helper for a resume. So that's one example. We want to make sure that your resume, when I'm writing a resume or my writers are writing a resume for clients, we want to make sure that your resume is effectively passing through applicant tracking systems. That's one of the first things we think about. And there are a couple aspects to that. One is the formatting of the resume itself. I see a lot of resumes that are sent to me where they are very colorful and they have icons and all these different pictures and multiple vertical columns and different colors and whatever. And while it might be very visually appealing, it probably won't perform very well in an applicant tracking system. Another aspect of that is keywords. So one of the things we really take into account is making sure that if someone's applying to a project management job, we're finding similar project management jobs posted on the internet, and we're trying to line their resumes' keywords up with what those people are hiring for. Those are a couple of ways that you can mitigate hiring in today's world to try to make your resume more effective. So those are a couple commonalities for a strong resume. Obviously, spelling, grammar, punctuation, we want to see consistency in formatting. The simpler, the better, really. When I'm writing a resume from the perspective of someone who's worked for recruiting agencies and worked pretty closely with HR people. And if you are a senior web developer, you have a very highly technical skill set that a lot of people who don't work in your field might not understand. So as a resume writer, we need to communicate your very highly technical expertise for a simpler audience or an audience who's not as well versed in what you do. So that's a challenge, but a well-written resume is simple and can be understood by whoever was reading it.
So we talked about, get rid of the picture. Get rid of the blocks of color and the fancy formatting and multiple columns. Keep it simple. How many pages should it be?
That's the $1 million question, right? So generally, the shorter the better. If you can get your resume to a page and it's concise and it effectively displays your skills and your achievements, that's the prime scenario. There are certain situations where that's not practical. So, for example, I've worked with healthcare professionals, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're a doctor, you're a physician, or you are an experienced nurse or something like that, you may have a document that's, whether it's called a resume or a CV, you might have a 6 or an 8-page document that has valid, useful information about your professional and educational experience. So there are different situations where, there's a lot of information. We want to try to streamline it and make it as concise as possible. So In a situation like that, we get 6 pages of an existing resume. We might try to make that one 2 or 3 and just make sure, again, that the formatting is consistent and that the spacing is all even all around the document and all the wording is very consistent.
And I think too, is apart from the industry, probably your career stage has a big bearing on that too. You know, if you're an executive with 20 years of experience, you're going to have a longer resume than someone who graduated college a year ago.
Absolutely. And there are different ways to highlight experience of someone who's been in their career for 20 years. There's different ways to approach that resume to keep it concise. One of the possible ways there is a functional resume where you're talking about what that person's skills are, what their attributes are, what they can bring to an organization, highlighting that and minimizing, I worked here for 4 years, I worked here for 2.5 years. That can be an effective way to kind of bridge that gap. But you're right, definitely. If you're talking about a recent college grad or someone who's in college right now and applying to internships, it can be hard to fill a page sometimes if you've never worked very much. And, certainly if you're trying to make a resume 2 pages and you've got, 1 or 2 jobs or no jobs on your resume, that can be a challenge. So in that case, we'll try to play up potential skills, achievements, maybe, if they were a strong student, for example. We can talk about relevant coursework and GPA and ideally, some involvement while they're in school or something like that. But basically, it's a case-by-case basis.
I know that consistency in formatting is really important, but a lot of the resumes I see involve folks pushing their margins right out to the edge and just trying to cram a page with as much information as possible. Help us understand what an ideal kind of margin setting and font might be in both font style and font size.
Yeah, so there are some disagreements across the industry on that. Generally speaking, I'll tell you what I like and what in my experience has been effective from my recruiting experience and also from resume writing. In most cases, 9 out of 10, I'll stick to an 11-point font. In terms of margins, I will try to keep them even all around the page. I won't go ever more than 1 inch. In most cases, I'm closer to a 1/2 inch. So, okay. But I adjust them. So if I'm working on a resume and it comes out to be 2 pages and, 4 or 5 lines spill onto the next page, what I'll do is I'll just tweak the margins. So if I was at, 7/10 of an inch, I'll make it 6/10 of an inch. So I squeeze a little bit more of that content onto the second page. Also, the margins don't have to be exactly even. So if you have, 6/10 of an inch all the way around the document and you wanted to make it 0.5 on the top and bottom so you can squeeze a little bit more text on, even if it's just 1 line, that's a good little trick. Want to make sure that, spacing between sections of the resume, like, you see an executive summary at the top and then it rolls into your highlights of expertise where it's got some bullet points of what you've done and what you're capable of, and then it rolls into your professional experience and your education. You want to make sure that the spacing between all of those things is consistent all the way through. And you might be able to get away with an error here and there, but sometimes you'll find somebody who works in HR or just a hiring manager or a recruiter who is really attentive to detail. And if you're working in a field or you're applying to jobs where you're required to be attentive to detail, that's very important. So those are all things to keep in mind for sure.
What do you think of an objective setting? Because a lot of the time I read these objective sections and it's obvious what the objective is. You've applied for a job and it sounds like, at different points there's been trends where the objective section has been very popular and then it's kind of fallen out of favor and at times it seems like it's come back. Why would you include an objective section? And if you were to, how would you go about it and what would it look like?
Yeah, I don't most of the time. In a lot of cases, I'll try to convince somebody to do that in a cover letter because I think that cover letters still can be very effective for telling the personal story of, I have a background in this and I want to move into this type of an organization. In my opinion, that doesn't really have a strong place on the resume. Yep. The only exception is, and I've found myself doing this lately, typically we'll do a summary paragraph below the contact information at the top of the resume. Experienced human resources professional with 15 plus years of broad expertise spanning the healthcare and information technology markets or whatever. At the end of a paragraph like that, sometimes I will include interested in positions in HR administration or something like that. People changing careers, for example, where I had one recently who had oil and gas energy industry experience, and she wanted to move into the renewable energy industry. Mm-hmm. So in a case like that, I would say looking to translate my experience from the oil and gas industry into renewable energy, just as a finishing point to that paragraph where you now see what this person is capable of and what some of their kind of skills and background are and what their direction is. But I don't do a whole objective paragraph or anything like that when I'm writing resumes.
And when you're writing a resume, because space is generally at a premium, do you list all the references or do you just say references available upon request?
Neither, actually.
Okay.
And that was something I did wrong at first. If someone, so this is, until someone proves me wrong on this is how I feel about it. If someone wants to interview you and they want to go ahead and check your references to potentially make you an offer, they'll ask you for your references. You're right. Space is at a premium. It's not worth putting it on the resume. They'll know how to get in touch with you. Your contact information is there. They'll send you an email or they'll give you a call if they want to check your references. Definitely don't put someone's name and phone number on there, especially now with a lot of hiring being digital. If you're putting that resume into an applicant tracking system, you're putting that person's name and phone number wherever on the internet. Unless you're reading Indeed's terms and conditions to know where that resume is going, it's risky. So in my opinion, don't put anything about references on the resume.
And that can be said even for your own address, your home address.
Yes.
Once it goes, just if they can get a hold of you with an email and a cell, and arguably even just an email, there's no need for you to give them your social security, your date of birth, your home address, especially as you say when it gets pushed into an ATS.
No, to me, Google Maps is out there in my head. So if I see an address, I'm like, oh, I want to know where that is. I'm interested in geography, and this might just be me. But, if I see an address somewhere, I'm like, oh, I want to see what that place looks like. And, if someone's putting that out there for free on their resume, you're not making yourself a more appealing candidate by having your actual full street address on there. You can put city and state and zip code if you want to. And I think that's probably a good, for most people. And again, this has changed with COVID-19 in a way that everything's shifted for a lot of people toward remote work, but a lot of jobs are still in person. So obviously it's important to have your location down there. Again, I wouldn't ever condone putting your full street address.
Yeah. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? Because I'm sure resumes now are different to what they were in the 90s and the 80s. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in your world when it comes to resumes?
Yeah, I mean, number one, I kind of already touched on, applicant tracking systems are huge and they're not going anywhere. And so formatting your resume for ATS is number one, first and foremost. I kind of touched on this too. I've seen some funky resumes that, they have fancy columns and fancy text and different colors and lots of icons and stuff like that. I'm not seeing really any positive results with those recently. The only possible situation where that might work would be like a creative. And, my opinion is not the be all end all on this, but I think that for people who are creating for a living, to have a very strong visually appealing resume could be important. For a lot of us where you are, most people work for companies that are more than 50 employees. Yeah. So when they post a job on the internet, they'll get a lot of applicants for it. If your resume is not standing out with keywords and formatting, you're not being seen. So ATS is the number one. Everything now, there's a big push, there's a lot of competition for conciseness. So if you're rambling and you are adding in editorials about how you were a masterful customer service person and you worked great as a member of a team, that's fine. But what did you accomplish? A big part of what's important in a resume now is, how did you add value? Why do I want to hire you? Yes, you could pick up the phone and talk to somebody, that's great. But did you upsell customers? Did you get 5-star customer service ratings? Things like that are really, really important. Where to me, in the back of my head 5 years ago, I remember seeing a lot more resumes that had quote unquote fluff, where there was information, people talking about their own personality characteristics or whatever. But now it's very much, you need to have your achievements spelled out clearly on your resume for it to be effective.
Yeah, and it sounds like too those achievements, as opposed to just the things you've done. The things you've done is more historical. This is what I've done in the past, but it sounds like what you're saying is a strong resume is listing the things that show you are likely to be successful in this role that you're applying for.
Yeah, exactly. I was able to adapt. I was able to change. I was able to learn this thing. I was able to enable this business unit to grow. I was able to launch this website. I was able to, whatever it might be. It's got to be something that the reader can translate into their own business.
Yeah. I think the other thing here too, with the increasing reliance on applicant tracking systems, I think it just highlights how important it is for people to be constantly building their network.
Yes.
Because the best way to get around an ATS is to have a direct referral.
Yes. Amen. That is, absolutely. You can circumvent the whole resume submission application process, waiting for an email, if you can use your network. And obviously another trend that I probably don't need to talk about, but I will, LinkedIn is a behemoth. And there are so many jobs posted on LinkedIn all the time. And your LinkedIn profile is such a huge asset, just in the one fact that someone can see your application to a job on LinkedIn and immediately put a face to that name by checking out your profile.
Yeah.
Having a well-built LinkedIn profile is huge. For people who are new LinkedIn users, connect with everyone you know, talk to everyone you know, be vulnerable, post on LinkedIn, let people know what you're looking for. You might just catch somebody at the right time, and that can get you a job. That can get you your dream job.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a theme that is recurring throughout this podcast, is just the importance of being, it used to be that you could get by without it, but you can't anymore. And even if you're a college student, you need to have a LinkedIn profile and you need to be on it and you need to be maximizing the power of it. I want to come back to a comment that you made just a little earlier about length of resumes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned curriculum vitae or CVs. Help us understand what's the difference between a resume and a CV.
Yeah, so I'll speak from my experience, which is not necessarily comprehensive, but from what I've seen, I'm American. I've been here for my whole life. I've seen 99.5% of all the professional documents that have come across my desk or that I've seen in emails have been resumes. I understand that CVs, the CV format, which can be more comprehensive, genuine, typically it goes more into your full background. It's common with medical professionals, for example, who have publications or
academics,
who have done academics, extensive coursework, things like that, to have that all be written on a CV. For my purposes, resumes are where I live. I don't really work personally much with CVs. I have a couple of writers on my team who do well with CVs. I also understand that in other countries, CVs are more common.
Europe, for example.
In Europe, exactly. Yeah. Europe, it's very common to have a CV format. So that's pretty much the extent of my knowledge on that, to be honest with you. I know that resumes typically are shorter, more concise. Like I said, ideally, a page or two and very effectively written is what you want to see out of a resume. A CV for certain applications is very useful, but most of what I deal with personally is resumes.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to the point that I can't think of a professional job where being a poor communicator is an asset. And so being able to write clearly and concisely not only allows you to present a better image through your resume, but it allows you to demonstrate your communication skills.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really important. That is your first interview. I say it all the time. Your resume is your first interview. The second you hit that person's eyes when you apply to a job and the hiring manager sees your name there, that's your first impression. So it's got to be done right.
And it's a quick one. I mean, I don't know where this figure came from, but the figure I always heard was 6 seconds. The average resume gets about 6 seconds of eyeball time. and then it's on to the next one. And you have to be able to grab their attention and demonstrate your value in that 6-second window.
Yeah, absolutely. And, everything is so immediate these days, and we have cell phone coverage everywhere we go. And you can get anything within a few seconds on the internet these days.
Yeah.
So that's what our brains are accustomed to seeing. So for a human resources person or a hiring manager picking up that resume, you don't get a second chance. It's you make an impression on them right away with a strong resume, or you're not considered for the job. And that's as quick as it goes.
Yeah.
And, some people go through dozens or hundreds of that process over and over again. You spend so much time applying to jobs when, in my opinion, if you had written the resume more persuasively to begin with, it saves a lot of your time, can save you money, stress, and so on.
Quality over quantity every time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have a preferred format? Do you prefer that people save in a PDF and submit it as a PDF as opposed to Word? Or do you have a preference for Office submissions if you don't use a PDF over maybe some of the alternative document formats?
With Career Pulse, we do Word docs and we do PDFs.
Mm-hmm.
I've had bad luck with Google Docs as an official resume writing platform. I've had some formatting inconsistencies. So basically, we submit our drafts and our finished documents in Word and PDF format. In my experience, when people are applying to jobs, it's probably best to send both if they can. If you have to pick one, the Word document typically performs better in applicant tracking systems. If you are emailing a resume, generally it's safest to use a PDF because a PDF has consistent formatting, whether you're looking at it on your laptop or your cell phone or whatever. For me personally, I use Gmail for my personal email. Mm-hmm. And when I open a Word document in the Gmail browser, the formatting's all messed up every time. So I've had customers get mad at me when I send them a Word document and they open it up in Gmail and they're like, this looks like crap. Why, my bullet points are all messed up. I've got typos. And I'm like, no, you need to download it to your computer and open it up in Microsoft Word to see it correctly.
Yeah.
So there are ways to mitigate that stuff, but quick answer, I guess, is generally a Word document is better.
Let's turn our attention now to, I think, generally speaking, the three categories of listeners that we have here on The Professionists. We have college students, recent college grads, younger professionals, and then folks in their mid to late career who are either looking at a switch or facing a job search that maybe they didn't anticipate. Looking at those broad categories, what general pieces of advice would you have first for the college student / under 25-year-old?
Yeah, good question. From a resume writing perspective, having a template, having a document to base yourself off of can be really helpful. You may, if you are younger, you don't have a lot of professional experience, you may have to adjust your resume for individual jobs just to try to show, based on the job description, which of those skills you match. For me, I was fortunate. I had worked quite a bit before I went to college, just odd jobs. I worked in a zoo. I worked in a supermarket. So some random stuff there. And I had things to put down on my resume. They weren't necessarily relevant things for, my first internship, for example, was at a newspaper. Running an amusement ride at a zoo doesn't necessarily qualify you for working as a newspaper intern.
Yeah.
But I had something down on my resume showing that I was stable and that I was worth employing from having worked for a couple of years. Some college students don't have that. So some college students haven't worked in high school, haven't needed to. Maybe they got to college and then decided, I probably need to have some internship experience so somebody can tell that I'm working.
Yeah.
In order to be more employable. So I guess my first bit of advice is stop where you're at, imagine where you could be in a couple of years and say, how do I get there?
Yeah.
It may be that you go and work and do something that you feel is below you, or you take an internship that's not exactly where you want it to be, just to get the experience of working, the experience of, in a lot of cases doing customer service or, even corporate communication, sending emails or whatever. That can be really valuable. And you can extract useful experience from almost anything. to put on a resume.
Yeah. It's all about the narrative that you use. I think too, especially for, people under 25, that 18 to 25 bracket, is keep an activity log. Write down everything you do so that when you do go to write your first internship resume or job resume, you don't have to think back, gosh, what did I do 2 years ago? You've got it all written down, and then you just pick the very best stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that memory is really important. And even we talked about the difference between being an achiever and being a doer. Even if you can't write your experience like an achiever yet, just say, oh, I did this at work today. We built this. I helped a customer with this, whatever it is. Write that down. Put it on a note on your iPhone or something so you have it. And then when it comes time to build a resume, you decide you see an internship or a job you really want, then you can translate that into, okay, I achieved this and we built this and it added value by doing this.
What about the 25 to 35-year-old bracket, that kind of traditional young professional bracket who are maybe either looking to move from their entry-level position to something a little step up, or maybe looking at moving into a slightly different industry? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's the bracket I'm in, and I recently kind of uprooted what I was doing and made a huge change. I hear a lot of transition in that range. A lot of people saying, oh, I worked in, not to pick on finance, I worked in finance for 7 years and decided now, and especially there's been a lot of those stories since COVID. A lot of people are saying, this has put into perspective for me what I've been doing. And now that I've been working at home, I want to make a change. I want to do something new. And for me, being in that age bracket, financials have always been really important in what I've been doing for work. I've always wanted to make sure I could make ends meet. And, there are some people who have that financial stress and there are some who don't, who have more of a freedom to be able to go into work and kind of focus more on work than on personal stuff. But I think it's really important to be asking yourself every so often, is this the path I'm on? Do I want to be doing this? How enthusiastic do I feel about this? And can I be doing it better? And if this is not really what I want to be doing, well, is it time to make a move? I've posted recently on social media, it's never too late to reinvent yourself. No. And I probably am not talking about this in the right age bracket of the question you just asked me, but it's really never too late to reinvent yourself. And I find that when people are bold enough to take the jump and do it, they rarely regret it. So, in that age bracket, like I said, I've seen a lot of transition and a lot of people who are making moves, and I'd say that just go for it.
Yeah, and I think too, coming up with, I think it's important to ask why you want to. If you are changing industries or sectors, I think it's really important to figure out why. Because if you don't know that why, the same problem may actually come up in that next industry or the next sector. So doing some of that self-reflection, why do I want to move? What is it that I'm moving for? Before you actually make that switch can save you a lot of time in the long run. Yeah, absolutely. And I've been guilty of that. I've jumped sales jobs several times and I thought, oh, this is going to be different this time. There's something that I have not liked about this job. And when I get this new job, something will change. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, it didn't. And as soon as that new learning curve was over, this is just me. And I have a shorter attention span than most. And I'm just speaking from my own experience here. But for me, when that learning curve was over, I got bored and I wanted to go and do something new. And so it took me until I was 28 to figure out, okay, the problem here was not the work that I was doing, and it wasn't the people I was with and the companies I was working for. It was that I didn't really understand why I was working. And now I realized that what I wanted to be doing was constantly renewing. In other words, having multiple people that I'm talking to simultaneously and multiple projects going on for me keeps the whole process novel enough where I stay interested in it. And that's why resume writing, I think, is a good fit for me personally, because I discovered that what I really like is not transactional, but I like working with multiple people at a time and then starting over again,
but within the
Yeah.
same context of the company and the business and what I'm doing. That to me is what I need to keep it engaging and to keep it fun.
That's good advice. I want to turn now to those kind of mid to late career folks who have, substantial experience, have been exposed to a lot of different situations, but perhaps have been in an industry for a long period of time and don't quite know how to translate all of that wealth of experience into a resume that opens up new challenges, new opportunities. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, good question. That's probably the highest percentage of people I'm talking to these days. And there are a couple of ways to do that. If you're changing career paths, a couple of techniques we use are, I mentioned the functional resume. So talking about someone's skills and abilities and specialties and highlighting that before highlighting, oh, I worked here for this long, I worked here for this long. That can be a really good way to make an impression on somebody if you are later in your career. It shouldn't be as important where you worked and how long you worked there and what your title was and what your team structure was and who you reported to. Mainly, when someone's looking to hire you, they want to know what you can do for them. It's a transaction at the end of the day, right? I'm going to pay you X. You're going to do this for me. And ideally, you bring more value than what you're being paid for. But I think that for people in that age bracket, it's really important to highlight those characteristics and the skills and the achievements. And if you are changing jobs, translate that the best you can. It can be a challenge. I think that for people who are, toward the tail end of their career, one of the questions I get a lot is, I feel like I'm not being hired because of my age. And that's a very common thing for resumes. And how do we mitigate the fact that someone's been in their career for 30 or 35 years and make that look to a 23-year-old recruiter like someone that they want to consider for this job? And there are a few techniques for that too. Generally, the rule of thumb is you want to highlight the most recent 15 years of experience on the resume with dates. And for the rest of the experience, one trick I like to use is after your professional experience section, I'll add an additional experience section where I just show your title, the company that you worked for, and the location for maybe even your first 3 or 4 jobs, so that those aren't highlighted with the years. So someone's not looking at this and saying, okay, well, this person's been working since 1991. They're old or whatever. And, it's just about perspective and about the eyes of the person who are looking at the resume. But there are ways that we can kind of mitigate that experience for someone who's been in their career longer to make the resume more effective.
Fantastic. So in every episode, we like to ask our guests some of the questions that we've received from our audience. We are at theprofessionists on Instagram. If you have questions that you'd like us to put to guests in future episodes, please send us a direct message there, or you can contact us at contact@theprofessionists.com. Our first question comes from Rebecca in Chicago. And her question is, I took some time off to raise my 2 young children. They're now school age and I want to re-enter the workforce. How do I address the gap in my work history?
Yeah, that's another very common question, a great question. It's situational, but I'll do the best that I can with it. It depends on what the gap in your work is. So, if it's a couple years when you had a toddler and you were raising them or something like that, that's not as big of a deal. Most people will understand that with no problems. Yeah. It gets more complicated when, for example, I've worked with a couple of women lately who took 8 or 10 years off to be a mom. And they're very fortunate for this, and they're super upbeat about it, and they see it as great experience. And I agree, I think it's tremendous experience, but how do you translate that into a resume? And typically what I'll do is I'll put a section, if we're doing a chronological resume where we're listing your experience in order, I will put, full-time mom or stay-at-home mom or something like that as work experience. If that person has also done something else on the side while working as a full-time mom, such as volunteering or taking some courses or running a side business or something like that, that's tremendous experience. If not, and if you have a long gap where somebody hasn't necessarily done a lot that could be put on a resume during that time, then you might want to go with the functional resume where you're showing that, okay, this person's got whatever it might be, customer service skills, or they're technically apt, or something else that they can bring to an employer rather than just showing, oh, I did this, this, and this within this time frame.
That's great. That's helpful, because I think that can be a real challenge for a lot of folks, is addressing those gaps in time, and maybe it's a gap year or two, or maybe, like you say, something a little longer. Our second question is from Josh from Nashville, Tennessee, and his question is, how do I address a firing in my work history? My last job, I butted heads with my manager, and was fired for arguing with my boss. So how would you address a situation like that? Insubordination, that's the word I was thinking of.
Yeah.
How do you address something like that?
The cop-out answer, the quick answer is don't address it until you have to.
Yeah.
If you're in an interview and you're in the late stages and you say, okay, why did you leave this company? At that point, you want to be diplomatic and you want to be honest about it. You can say, I had some disagreements with my manager. I guess it would depend on the situation, to tell you the truth. But you can't lie, because we're in an age where you can check with human resources as quickly as you can snap your finger. So It's very important, but you don't want to say, I got fired for drinking on the job or something like that. You need to have a bit of class, right? And you need to have a little bit of diplomacy in the way that you present it. It's a difficult situation. Nobody wants to have an employment engagement end badly. I've had one of those myself, and that was the last one that ended was right when I decided to start Career Pulse, actually. And so I haven't personally dealt with that situation, but I think that the most important thing is that you're honest and you want to be positive about it and show, I had some disagreements with my manager. Here's what I was able to take away from the situation, and here's why I think that I'll still be a great asset to your organization.
Our last question is from Nigel in Chicago. And he said, I hate to say this, but I sound like a stereotypical millennial. I have moved into several jobs for no longer than 18 months in each position. I desperately want to settle down into a position that I can build a career out of, but I am concerned that the movement on my resume will make employers uneasy. How could I address this?
Yeah, it can, definitely. And again, I have personal experience in this, so I can definitely testify that it can definitely make things difficult. A well-written cover letter could be a remedy for that situation. If you can tell your personal story and say, I've bounced around a bit, I've had some inconsistency, I've really been trying to find my home, professionally speaking, and I'm really interested in this particular thing that's going on at your organization, and I'm passionate about it, and here's what I've done to show that I'm passionate about it. Whether you've taken some professional development courses or you have, even if you follow, back to LinkedIn for a second, even if you can follow companies and groups in your industry, it can show a potential employer that you're interested in that industry. So if you've bounced around to a bunch of sales jobs like I have, but you're really passionate about graphic design, go and follow a bunch of big graphic design and marketing agencies and take courses. There are probably free courses out there, I'm sure, in graphic design. Go and do something like that to show that this is what I want to be doing. It's not what I have been doing, but I'm trying to continually grow and to continually learn and get into this. And it may be an uphill battle, but you will find somebody who will say, okay, this person's legit. This person is sincere and wants to be working in this environment.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the networking thing, that's why it matters when it comes to having mentors who can give you good advice and can help you kind of leverage the experience you do have to get into the job that you ultimately want to end up in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, back to the networking, play on your network as much as you can and ask for help, and generally you'll receive it. In my experience with LinkedIn in particular, if you ask your network for help, people will show up. People want to help. That's a big part of what it's there for. Even if they're just liking, if you like one person's post, it gets shared with your entire network. So that could be
Yeah.
something that helps and connects you with the right person. Something as simple as that. LinkedIn is a great tool for that.
That's great advice. If you would like to contact Earl, you can, as I said at the beginning of the episode, you can head on over to www.careerpulse.co. But you can also contact Earl Dauley on LinkedIn. You can find him through the Professionist Podcast LinkedIn page. So go ahead and connect with him and start building that network today. We really hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and we are so grateful that you're here to find your fit with us. If you would like to find out more about the Professionist Podcast, go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. You can find us on Instagram at The Professionists and, of course, on LinkedIn. But you can also go over to www.theprofessionists.com. We'll see you in the next episode.